Good evening. Is that better? It's my pleasure to welcome you tonight to this lecture by Dr. Genie Scott. This is a lecture sponsored by the Department of Biology, the Howard Hughes Medical Research Institute program at the University of Washington, and the Advanced Program for Leadership at the University of Washington. This is also will be part of the series that the Howard Hughes Institute has initiated in Leaders in Education, and we will look forward to more such lectures in the future sponsored by the Howard Hughes program. Tonight we have Dr. Genie Scott to lecture to us. Dr. Scott got her PhD at the University of Missouri in physical anthropology and followed that by 15 years as a faculty member, first at the University of Kentucky and then at the University of Colorado, before moving in 1987 to take on responsibility as director of the National Center for Science Education in Oakland, California, where she has been since then. She has been honored by scientific organizations of a variety of stripes, including biologists, the American Institute of Biological Sciences, the Geological Society of America, and the National Association of Biological Teachers, who awarded her their highest award of honorary member. She's also been awarded honorary degrees from McGill University, Ohio State University, and soon Mount Holyoke University. Tonight she's going to talk to us about what's the fuss about intelligent design. Eugenie?
Well, good evening. Thank you so much for coming out to hear me. Listen, if the weather was this nice in the Bay Area, nobody'd come indoors. This is, we've had so much rain. This is like Seattle. What's going on here? I'm very pleased to be here. Thank you so much for that very kind introduction. Well, indeed, what's the fuss about intelligent design? You've probably heard about intelligent design. The New York Times had a full-page article on it last year. On the Discovery Institute, which some of you may know is right here in Seattle, which is the major think tank for intelligent design. Intelligent design has also been in the news regarding various school board controversies over the last few years. In Texas, for example, the Discovery Institute was very active in lobbying for changes in the Texas science education standards. Similarly, in Ohio a couple of years ago, and there have also been controversies at the local school board level as well. Okay, I know what you're doing. This is the problem. This is always the problem when I lecture at a university. You're all trying to read these slides. Okay, now, the slide is a prop. Okay, it is not just look at the headlines. It's an illustration of what I'm saying. You don't have to read the whole thing. Trust me. You'll be happier for it. Okay, anyway, exhortations to the contrary. One reason why you find so much controversy over evolution and controversy over science education is because science education in the United States is highly politicized. We organize science education, or education in general in this country, in terms of school boards, school districts, and there are 17,000 independent school districts in the United States, a small sample of which you see in this picture. Each of these school districts has a school board which is elected, and all elected officials tend to look over their shoulders at who is voting. And so you end up with education being much more politicized in the United States than anywhere else. Believe me, this does not happen every place else. One school district in particular I call your attention to, Dover, Pennsylvania, which was also very recently in the news, as was intelligent design. A couple of years ago, Dover was undertaking the process of selecting what high school biology textbooks they wanted to use for the next few years. One of the school board members did not like this book, which the teachers had recommended, saying that it was laced with Darwinism, and he wanted the school board to buy this book of Pandas and People to balance out the evolution in the standard commercial textbook. Well, this, of course, was objected to by the teachers, being as this of Pandas and People is an intelligent design textbook, and the science in it just really isn't very good, and I'll show you some examples of that later on. However, the school board did vote in intelligent design, and not too long thereafter, members of the community, 11 parents, sued the school district over the policy requiring the teaching of intelligent design and evidence against evolution. It was quite a lengthy trial. It even made The Daily Show, which goes to show what a cultural event this truly was. But when after, as one of the lawyers for the defense pointed out, after 40 days and 40 nights of trial, the judge who had listened to the arguments of the intelligent design supporters and the intelligent design detractors and heard a tremendous amount of testimony, witness statements, exhibits out the yin-yang, decided that intelligent design, in fact, was not science, and that the policy of teaching intelligent design in Dover had to be rescinded. Well, we have a lot of these controversies over evolution around the country, not just over intelligent design. And when I give a public lecture, I think it's always a very good idea to start out with, what is this evolution idea that people find so upsetting? Because in general, evolution isn't what people think it is. I suspect that if you were to walk down just about any street in this country and say, "Hi, what's evolution?" 9 out of 10 times you're going to get somebody answering, "Man evolved from monkeys," which it's a little more than that. I had a friend in physical anthropology who taught at a community college in the Southeast, and of course, this being college, of course, she taught evolution. I mean, evolution is controversial at the K-12 level. It's not controversial at the university level by any stretch of the imagination. And so she just went ahead and, taught evolution, even though she had students in the class who had never studied evolution before. I mean, their teachers just simply had closed the textbook when those chapters cycled in, and all the students knew about evolution really was what they learned on the street. And so she just went ahead and taught evolution like you do in college, and after a couple of weeks, one of these students came down to her and said, "Well, of course species change through time. You mean that's evolution? We thought evolution meant you can't believe in God." Well, evolution is not you can't believe in God, and evolution is not man evolved from monkeys. What evolution is a statement that the universe has had a history. Astronomy is an evolutionary science. Geology is an evolutionary science because the universe, the galaxies, the solar system, the planet Earth, they have all had a history, and the past is different from the present. Biology obviously is an evolutionary science, and so is anthropology, because biological organisms and human cultures have also changed through time in a cumulative fashion. I'm going to be talking today about biological evolution because I can only talk about one thing in one evening, and because biological evolution tends to be the one that is the most difficult in terms for science teachers and the education issue in the United States. When we talk about biological evolution, we're talking about what Darwin called descent with modification. We're talking about the big idea that living things had common ancestors. Now, you are already familiar with the idea of descent with modification because you have descended with modification from common ancestors, as have I. My sister Sue and I have descended from my father. Grandpa was also the father of Uncle John, and Uncle John is the father of cousin Liz. Now, Sue and I look more like each other than we look like Liz because Sue and I shared a common ancestor in Dad more recently than we shared a common ancestor in Grandpa. And this is the same way that it works in biology. Sue, I, and cousin Liz are more similar to each other than we are to my friend Bruce here, because we have to go back very far before we share a common ancestor with Bruce. But sooner or later, we'll have shared a common ancestor with Bruce. And probably more recently than from somebody from Asia or somebody from Africa, because Bruce is a European like we are. So the idea of common ancestry is really the big idea of evolution. And it works the same way with animals. Lions and hyenas look more like each other than they look like dogs because lions and hyenas shared a common felid ancestor with each other more recently than they shared a common carnivore ancestor with dogs. Cebus and howler monkeys look more like each other than they look like apes because they shared a common monkey-like ancestor with each other more recently than they shared a common primate ancestor with apes. But lions and Cebus monkeys look more like each other than they look like salamanders because they're all mammals. What evolution does, what this common ancestry idea does, this descent with modification idea does, is create this branching and splitting tree of life through time, what biologists often call nested hierarchies. It is what allows you to bring together species into genera, and genera into families, and families into orders, and so forth and so on. It's because evolution generates hierarchy in this branching sense. What evolution is a genealogical relationship of species through time, just like Sue and I and cousin Liz have a genealogical relationship through time with our earlier ancestors. I want to talk about evolution as being composed of three components. There's the big idea of evolution, which is common ancestry, which is what I've just been talking about. There's also the the processes or mechanisms of evolution, natural selection being the most important one, but other factors also affecting how this tree of life branches through time. There also are the patterns of evolution that we as evolutionary biologists study. The patterns of evolution are really the branchings of the tree of life writ large. Are birds actually descended from dinosaurs? Humans and apes shared a common ancestor. Where do monkeys come in? So forth and so on. Now, I think it's useful to conceptualize, to think about evolution as being composed of these three parts. Number one, because that's the way we study it. Many people specialize in studying the processes of evolution. Others specialize, their population genetics and so forth. Others specialize in studying the patterns of evolution, but we all accept the big idea of common ancestry. But it's also useful to conceptualize evolution this way because the opponents of evolution make some real category errors in their criticisms, and if you can learn to recognize them, it's, I think, very helpful in understanding this controversy. For example, they'll often argue that natural selection can't explain something or another, so therefore we question the whole idea of common ancestry. Well, that's just a category area. That is just sloppy thinking, because whether or not natural selection can explain something, natural selection as a mechanism of evolution can explain something about evolution, is independent of whether evolution itself took place, which is really what the big idea of evolution is all about. Similarly, there will be creationists who will argue about some dispute about the pattern of evolution, that, oh, scientist A says that birds aren't dinosaurs, and scientist B says that birds are dinosaurs, therefore living things didn't have common ancestors. Similar kind of category mistake. And you know, I think if you understand the history of the development of the idea of modern evolutionary biology, this becomes clearer. When Darwin wrote On the Origin of Species in 1859, he made basically 2 points. He said, living things descended with modification from common ancestors. He made an argument for the big idea, and then he argued that natural selection was the main mechanism or process that brought it about. Now, he used different kinds of data and different kinds of inference to come up with these two conclusions, and these are still valid separate areas today. It doesn't matter what the mechanism is, the evidence for common ancestry stands by itself. And as a matter of fact, during Darwin's day, the idea of common ancestry was accepted decades before the mechanism of natural selection. So the two really are conceptually decoupled, and they shouldn't be combined. And it also, I think, helps to understand, as I say, some of the arguments about evolution. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the anti-evolutionists. I'm going to talk mostly about intelligent design, but there really are two kinds of anti-evolutionists today. There are the Bible-based anti-evolutionists, the supporters of a view called creation science, and then there are the design-based or intelligent design creationists, which is the group that I'm going to be spending most of my time on tonight. But I want to make the point that creation science is the bigger set, that basically intelligent design is a subset of the larger area of creation science, as shown in this nested diagram here. Intelligent design does not make all the claims of creation science. For example, creation science argues that the Earth is only 10,000 years old. That's not part of intelligent design. But everything that you find in intelligent design is found has been found previously and is found in creation science. There's really nothing new here. It is a subset of creation science. But let's talk first about creation science. Creation science was the creation largely of this man, Henry Morris. The late Henry Morris, he died just last month at the age of 84. Henry Morris developed the field of creation science, he and a group of colleagues, which was an argument that a basically biblical literalist view of creation, the 6 24-hour days, a real Adam and Eve, a real Noah's flood, could be supported through the theory and facts of science. That's why it was called scientific creationism. It wasn't just biblical creationism. But it was based upon a theological view known as special creationism. Now, in special creationism, obviously God created. All Christians believe God created. But special creationism is a statement about how God created. And in special creationism, God creates everything in its present form. So in creation science, for example, God creates all the plants and animals in their present form. God creates the solar system in its present form. God creates the galaxy in its present form. The galaxy, the solar system, plants and animals, none of this evolved. None of this descended with modification, so to speak. All of it was created as you see it today. In terms of biology, special creation argues that God created kinds of organisms with restricted or limited genetic variability. So you would have a cat kind and a dog kind, but you wouldn't have a common ancestor of the cat kind and dog kind. They were separately created. And the most common form of special creationism is usually that God created everything all at one time, but it doesn't have to be. In intelligent design creationism, you have something called progressive creationism, where God creates consecutively through time. So God first would create DNA, and then he would create the first cell, and then he would create something like the bacteria flagellum, and then he would create something like the Cambrian body plans, and so forth and so on. It is a type of special creation because the big idea of special creationism is the creation of things in their present form, and that is true of creation science or of intelligent design. What you find when you look at either creation science or scientific creationism is what they call the two-model approach, whereas all you have to do is disprove evolution and creationism wins by default. Disproving evolution proves creationism because they believe there are only two alternatives. Well, anybody with even a small amount of understanding of even Christian religion knows that this is not true. Special creationism is not the only Christian view. There is something called, for example, theistic evolution, among other Christian views. This is what you learned if you went to Catholic school. You learned that, of course, evolution took place. Of course, God created through evolution. And this is certainly very distinct from the special creation that you find in creation science. But don't be just Abrahamocentric, shall we say. Don't just think of the Abrahamic faiths. There's more to world religions than Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. You also have many other faiths which and tribal religions as well, all of which have their own versions of how the world came to be. And they are not evolutionary, and they are not special creation either. So it simply is wrong to assume that disproving evolution proves creationism. But this is really the organizing principle of both creation science and the about 95% of intelligent design. What you have in the creation science literature and the other literature is a series of efforts to try to prove that evolution didn't happen. The evidence against evolution includes, for example, gaps in the fossil record. So here we have a sequence of organisms from fish-like forms to the very early primitive land amphibious forms, land tetrapods as they're called, the four-legged landforms. But obviously you don't have a smooth sequence here. Well, by golly, just a couple of weeks ago, some paleontologists found a new fossil called Tiktaalik, which is a really beautiful intermediate between two forms. But if you're a creation scientist, that merely proves that there are gaps in the fossil record, because now you've got two new gaps. One of the real interesting philosophical misunderstandings of creation science and intelligent design is the equation of natural cause with chance. It's as if they believe that any sort of natural cause has to be random or chance or chaotic or undirected or a mess. And so therefore, the fact that we can look at biological organisms and see tremendously complicated structures like the bacteria flagellum, which the intelligent design people are so fond of, or the vertebrate eye, or the mammalian ear, all of these structures which are just really so intricate and organized and do their job so well of pushing the little bacterium through the water or helping you hear or see or whatever, that this means that that couldn't possibly be the result of natural cause. That clearly anything that is complicated couldn't be the result of nature, because nature is blind and chaotic and random and doesn't work, and has to be the result of special creation, has to be the result of design. You find this especially in the intelligent design literature, where they will argue that the body plans of the Cambrian explosion, the difference between, say, a segmented worm and an annelid, or excuse me, a segmented worm and an arthropod, say, or the difference between sponges and jellyfish. These kinds of basic body plan differences could not be explained through natural cause. They are so complicated and so unique that they can only be explained through the direct hand of God. Another example of this is the origin of life. This supposedly also could not possibly occur through chance. There could not be, the first replicating structure is so complicated it had to have been specially designed. You find this over and over and over in the literature. But of course, you also find, if you look for it, a great deal of counter evidence against these statements. And there actually is quite a bit of evidence for evolution, which I will not be going into in this lecture, since this lecture is about intelligent design. They'll also argue as evidence against evolution that there's supposedly this huge gap between microevolutionary processes like natural selection, mutation, migration, and drift, which operate within a created kind, and macroevolution, which they don't understand, but by which they mean common ancestry. And this, of course, has been analyzed by evolutionary biologists and shown to be an erroneous conclusion as well. In the most common, in creation science, you also find the argument that the Earth is too young for evolution to have taken place, therefore, clearly, creationism wins. Now, all of these arguments, except the young Earth one, are also found in intelligent design, which is why I argue that intelligent design is just a subset of creation science, rather than a unique new scientific perspective. So let me tell you a little bit about the history of intelligent design. But it is also going to be a little bit about the history of creation science, because you really can't see the whole picture unless you kind of understand the legal situation as well. The heyday, shall we say, of creation science was the late 1970s and the early 1980s, when around the country many citizens proposed to their state legislatures that bills be passed requiring that if evolution were taught in the public schools, then it had to be balanced by being taught with creation science. And these creation science equal time bills were quite popular. They showed up in your state and all the states that I've lived in over the last few years. I think we counted 23 states total which had equal time legislation proposed. In most cases, this legislation died in committee. It never got anywhere. But in the state of Louisiana, Louisiana Act 590 did pass. And it was immediately enjoined by citizens in the state of Arkansas to prevent the enforcement of this Equal Time for Creation Science Act. Reverend Bill McLean was the lead plaintiff of McLean versus Arkansas. And in fact, the majority of the plaintiffs against the Equal Time Bill were leaders of religious denominations: Presbyterians, United Methodists, Episcopal, Catholic, African Methodist Episcopal, and yes, in 1982, Southern Baptists. They've changed their mind. But I think it's important to realize this was not a science versus religion issue. This was the holders of one sectarian religious view versus everybody else. All these religious leaders in Arkansas sued to prevent the teaching of creation science because they recognized creation science was special creationism. It was a specific sectarian view, and it wasn't what they were teaching their kids. And they didn't want kids learning biblical literalism as science Monday through Friday and then have to straighten them out in Sunday school. So they sued the state to stop this law from going into effect. This was a full trial. The witnesses for the plaintiffs consisted of some of the most eminent scientists in the country, National Academy of Sciences members like Francisco Ayala, Stephen Jay Gould, Harold Morowitz, Brent Dalrymple, all looking real young. It's all right, we all looked young 20 years ago. The witnesses, the expert witnesses for the defense, for the pro-creation science side, were considerably less well known and generally came from much smaller universities and did not really make a very good scientific case. In fact, the lawyers for the plaintiffs managed to get the expert witnesses for the defense to make some quite embarrassing statements. Theology teacher says he believes UFOs, Satan's work. This is not going to increase your credibility with the judge a whole lot. And in fact, when the judge, after the judge heard several weeks of trial, listened to all the testimony, struck down the creation science law in Arkansas. Well, the creationists lost so badly in Arkansas, they didn't even appeal. And so the wonderful court record for McLean versus Arkansas remained a wonderful court record, but it didn't have any precedent anyplace else in the country. It was neighboring Louisiana that passed an equal time for creation science bill a couple of years later that was also enjoined by parents, including teacher Edwin Aguillard. And Edwards versus Aguillard was eventually struck down by the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court decided that creation science was unconstitutional to teach. It still crops up. You still have teachers being importuned by parents and sometimes, unfortunately, school board members to teach it, but it is simply unconstitutional to teach creation science. Well, around about the time of McLean versus Arkansas, in the early 1980s, 81, 82, John Buell at the Foundation for Thought and Ethics, a Christian ministry in Dallas, Texas, was with a group of similar conservative Christians trying to devise an anti-evolution position that would be more attractive than creation science, more attractive in two ways. More attractive legally, in the sense that creation science does mention creation, so right away you're going to have trouble with the First Amendment because it's obvious that you're promoting a religious view, but also the fact that creation science made all of these kind of off-the-wall sounding claims about a 10,000-year-old Earth and a real Noah's flood that cut the Grand Canyon, that laid down the sediments of the Grand Canyon, and the Grand Canyon was cut in a week, by the way. So it made all these statements that most people thought were kind of out there. And furthermore, because of its stress on biblical literalism, creation science was really only appealing to that segment of American Christianity that was the most conservative. And what Buell and his colleagues sought was a broader kind of creationism, if you will, that would be legally viable but also more attractive. The first book that they came up with was this book called The Mystery of Life's Origin, which, as it sounds, was about the origin of life. And the argument that was made in this book, which is considered the founding book of intelligent design, by the way, what they argued in The Mystery of Life's Origin is that there were some scientific problems, and the origin of life was one of them, that simply were unsolvable. Not that the origin of life was an unsolved problem, because certainly it is. We do not have agreement among scientists for a step-by-step procedure going from inorganic molecules to the first cell. We got a lot of pieces, but no, we don't have consensus on that idea. But unsolvable is different from unsolved. And the argument that they made in Mystery of Life's Origin is that there are problems that are just, by the nature of their extreme complexity, unsolvable. Just take them off the table and attribute the solution to that problem to intelligence. Dean Kenyon wrote the introduction to that book, and he wrote, "It is fundamentally implausible that unassisted matter and energy organize themselves into living systems." So here again is the idea that natural process is chance, only design, only intelligence, only God can explain complicated things. Well, this, of course, is exactly the same thing as William Paley argued in his book Natural Theology in 1802. In Natural Theology, William Paley used the watch as an analogy. He said, if you see a watch, you know because of the complexity of the watch, all the springs and wires and gears and stuff that goes into making a watch be able to tell time, you know that because of this, all this complexity here, that there had to have been a watchmaker, because all these springs and wires and gears couldn't just spontaneously come together to form an artifact that could tell time. That would be silly, and obviously he's correct. He says, when you see something like the vertebrate eye, it's obviously so complicated. All of these springs and wires and gears and the equivalent, all of these lenses and muscles and vessels and pieces and parts, clearly all of these could not have come together by natural cause, which of course is chance, it's random. It had to have been the result of a divine intelligence. William Paley's Natural Theology book was an apologetic. It was an argument for the existence of God. It was a theological work. Now, of course, what Darwin did is he came up with a natural explanation for how you can build complicated things like eyeballs, and complicated things like bacteria flagella, and complicated things like any number of other complicated biological phenomena. His natural process that would do this was natural selection. And it did not involve the requirement that intelligence be part of it. Natural selection can do it by itself. Now, theologians, clergymen of Darwin's time in England, sat back and said, well, I guess God invented natural selection. And that has worked for the vast majority of Christians. It was only relatively recently that biblical literalist Christianity came to the fore in North America, where it has never been very strong in the continent and in Great Britain, and at the turn of the 20th century became a very strong component of American Christianity. And biblical literalism rejects this idea that natural cause could produce something like vertebrate eyes. Well, The Mystery of Life's Origin was the first production of the Foundation for Thought and Ethics in trying to build this new theoretical perspective that would avoid the problems of creation science. But even before Mystery of Life's Origin was published, which was 1984, if I didn't mention that, and another book was in the pipeline, so to speak. As early as 1981, the Students for Origins Research publication wrote that a high school biology book is going to be written to present both evolution and creation while limiting discussion to scientific data. Well, of course, this is what creation science was all about, wasn't it? Creation science argued that it was going to present evidence for evolution and creation, or actually evidence against evolution, just using scientific data. This book became Of Pandas and People, which was the book that was part of the contention in Dover, Pennsylvania. I want to go over a couple of things in this book because I think it helps to illustrate why the science is just so bad, but also illustrate the connection between intelligent design and creation science. Of Pandas and People is the first book to use the term intelligent design. You know, it's really kind of hard to see some of these slides. Is it possible to dim some of the lights on stage a little bit? I guess not, huh? Is it possible to dim just maybe a couple of the front lights? See if possible, otherwise people will just have to... That's probably a little better, isn't it? Yes. Thank you very much for doing that. Much obliged. Here is a diagram of what are called cytochrome C distance measures. This is a diagram from Of Pandas and People. Now, cytochrome C is never mind what it does. It's involved in energy. It's a very old protein, and it's found in all vertebrates and a whole lot of other environments as well. But on this diagram, which actually shows it pretty well there, I think, you see that the distance between carp and bullfrog is 13 units, carp and turtle is 13 units, carp and chicken is 14 units, carp and rabbit is 13, carp and horse is 13. Yeah, that's fine. Okay, now, here's what the text says about this diagram, and I quote, "Amphibians, represented in the chart by the bullfrog, are traditionally considered closer to fish in the evolutionary scale. Yet on a molecular level, they are no closer to fish than to reptiles or to mammals. To use the classic Darwinian scenario, amphibians are intermediate between fish and the other land-dwelling vertebrates. Analysis of their amino acids should place amphibians in an approximately intermediate position, but it does not. Looks pretty bad for evolution there, doesn't it? Well, that grinding of molars you hear is the evolutionary biologist next to you clenching his teeth. This is absolute nonsense. What you just heard from the Of Pandas and People authors, this is supposed to be a textbook for high school biology students to teach them the real stuff, is the old great chain of being, that the worm mounting through the spires of forms striving to be man, etc. Primitive invertebrates evolve into more complex invertebrates, evolve into simple vertebrates, evolve into salamanders, and then reptiles, and then simple mammals. Isn't that a cute bunny? And then you have higher mammals, and guess who's on top, of course? This is the great chain of being. This is not how evolutionary biologists look at biological variation or at the similarities and differences of animals through time. Here's how we look at it. Okay, here's fish. Okay, this is actually a cytochrome C tree. It's a not terribly good one, but this is the best I could find at short notice. I want you to look at this node right here. Okay, that node is the common ancestor of all the land vertebrates. All the land vertebrates, amphibians, reptiles, birds, and mammals, all shared a single common ancestor. Okay? Now, the difference between that node and the one right below it, that's the distance between fish and all of the land tetrapods. In other words, the data that are shown by the cytochrome C comparisons are exactly what we would expect. All of the land vertebrates, amphibians, reptiles, birds, and mammals would all be expected to be equally distant from fish because all of them shared a common ancestor equally removed from fish. It is not that amphibians are closer to fish. That's the great chain of being. That is not evolutionary biology. But this is what Pandas and People wanted to teach, and this is exactly what creation science teaches. So here's the very first intelligent design book that is presenting exactly the same argument as creation science presented. It does certainly seem to be that in content this is very similar. Well, there's other evidence of close ties between Pandas and People and creation science. During the Kitzmiller versus Dover trial that was held this last fall, one of the events that occurred in preparation for the trial was that the lawyers for the plaintiffs, the lawyers for the parents who were suing, managed to subpoena early copies of Pandas and People, and there were quite a few of them. Creation Biology, 1983, Biology and Creation, 1986, Biology and Origins, 1987, and then in 1987 they changed the name of the book to Pandas, and there were two versions of Pandas in 1987, and then the first publication of Pandas was 1989, and then the second edition of Pandas was published in 1993, so that's the x-axis down there. Well, one of my colleagues, once we got the NCSC was acted as an advisor to the plaintiff's legal team, and once we received the manuscripts, we scanned them, and one of my guys is really good at computers, and he wrote some scripts to do word counts, 5-word strings, 10-word strings. We were easily able to demonstrate that this was the same book, manuscript after manuscript, but also we decided to do some word counts. How often does the term creationism or creationist show up versus how often does the term intelligent design show up? Very interesting relationship. All the early copies of Pandas and People, all of them having very creationist sounding names like Biology and Creation, Creation Biology, all of those have a very high level of counts of the word creationist or creationism. And there's an interesting change here. Once the book becomes called Pandas and People, the frequency of creationism kinds of wording drops off to negligible, and very frequently people start talking about intelligent design. And what happened in 1987, everybody? Edwards versus Aguilar, the Supreme Court decision striking down creation science. But that might just be a coincidence. But then when we looked more carefully at the wording, we found passages that also indicated that there was a very close relationship of pandas and people and creation science. In one of the early manuscripts, Biology and Creation, appears this paragraph. Creation means that the various forms of life began abruptly through the agency of an intelligent creator, with their distinctive features already intact. Fish with fins and scales, birds with feathers, beaks and wings, etc. Well, that's, of course, special creation, isn't it? Began abruptly, with their distinctive features already intact. Right, that's special creation. And in fact, this is an accurate definition. Creation means, yes, poof, there you have it. This also was the case with Biology and Origins, 1987. Creation means that various forms of life began abruptly through the agency of an intelligent creator, capitalized this time, with their distinctive features already intact, fish with fins and scales, and so on. The first copy of Pandas and People says, creation means that the various forms of life began abruptly through the agency of an intelligent creator. It's just the same as Biology and Origins earlier, but this is the missing link, because this was the first 1987 manuscript. The second 1987 manuscript says, intelligent design means that various forms of life began abruptly through an intelligent agency, with their fish with fins and scales, birds with feathers, beaks, and wings. Well, the judge kind of had the same reaction you all did. This looks highly suspicious. So the history of intelligent design certainly does place its genesis within the creation science camp. But what exactly are the claims of intelligent design? Now, I've given you the history. Let me tell you a little bit about intelligent design itself. Well, if we're going to talk about the science of intelligent design, it's kind of a short list. Basically, what intelligent design argues is that the universe, or at least parts of it, have been designed by an intelligence. And the big idea of intelligent design is that it's possible to detect evidence of design by this intelligence. And the way they do that is through the application of two procedures. One is Michael Behe's irreducible complexity concept, and the second is William Dembski's concept of the design inference, the explanatory filter, if you will, sometimes called complex specified information. Behe's Darwin's black box sets out the argument for irreducible complexity, and the design inference is described in Bill Dembski's book of the same title. These books were written in the mid-1990s, 96 and 97 respectively, but frankly, no substantial new ideas have been added to intelligent design since that time. I suppose we could argue about Dembski's no free lunch, but that's been pretty adequately trashed by the people who developed the no free lunch theorem, so we probably won't. So I think it's legitimate to discuss Darwin's the irreducible complexity or the design inference as being representative of modern intelligent design, even though it is a decade old, but nothing new has been added, so there you have it. I'm going to look at the design inference as my example this evening, but first I may be going to surprise you, and this may actually surprise my hosts, who probably didn't think I was going to do this, but I'm going to say something nice about intelligent design. Now, possibly this is because I was raised as an upper Midwestern Protestant, and we are taught the thumper principle, which is if you can't say something nice, don't say nothing at all. But I really am serious when I say that I am going to say something nice about intelligent design, because I think intelligent design reminds us of some things that we should keep in mind when we're talking about evolution, when we're thinking about evolution and science and religion issues. One of them, especially to teachers and college professors, is to remember to keep the door open to students in your classes who are believers, which is going to be the majority of them. It is very important that science is not taught as something that you have to make a choice about between what you learn in your science class and what you believe from your religious teachings. There are scientists, unfortunately, who do confuse this. There are scientists who confuse their own personal opinions their own personal philosophical or religious or anti-religious views with what you can say in the name of science. My friend Mike Shermer wrote a column in Scientific American in February of '02, speaking of the Gallup poll. He wrote, "A paltry 12% accept the standard scientific theory that, quote, human beings have developed over millions of years from less advanced forms of life, but God had no part in this process." Well, excuse me, since when has it been the standard scientific theory that God had nothing to do with it? What's that got to do with science? Science can't tell you whether God did it or God did not do it. And I think a scientist who makes that mistake is really going well beyond what you can say wearing your scientist hat. This is related to another positive effect of intelligent design, another nice thing I'm going to say about intelligent design, because it reminds us of the importance of distinguishing between philosophical naturalism or philosophical materialism, such as Mike is expressing here, that God had nothing to do with it, and methodological materialism. Now, the Discovery Institute feels very strongly about scientific materialism. In their wedge document, they write, "The center seeks nothing less than the overthrow of materialism and its cultural legacies." In this pullout down here, they write, "The center explores how new developments in biology, physics, and cognitive science raise serious doubts about scientific materialism and have reopened the case for a broadly theistic understanding of nature." What's scientific materialism? I mean, do you teach a class in Scientific Materialism 101? I mean, you know, no, this is, what is this? This is curious. The intelligent design proponents particularly, but also the creation science proponents, deliberately confuse two uses of the word materialism. We speak sometimes about methodological materialism. Materialism in this context refers to matter and energy. We explain science by matter and energy. We use material explanations, and in fact, we restrict ourselves to material explanations. Not because we all think God had nothing to do with it, but because material explanations are the ones you can test. And because science is about testing explanations against the natural world, we can only make hypotheses and make experiments and make tests over things that we can actually have some opportunity to hold constant some variables. And if there's an omnipotent force in the universe, how the heck do you keep them in a test tube? So methodological materialism is just a kind of a ground rule of science. It's how we do science. It's a restriction on science. And it means that we explain through natural cause. There also is philosophical materialism, which is what Mike was expressing in that quote I showed you. And this is the point of view that there is no God, there are no spirits, there's no supernatural. Matter and energy is all there is in the universe. And that's a perfectly respectable philosophical view, but it's not the same thing as methodological materialism. But this is what the intelligent design people want the public to believe, that if you explain something through natural cause, therefore you are saying God had nothing to do with it. So really complex structures like the vertebrate eye or the bacteria flagellum have to be created by God. They cannot be explained through natural cause. Okay, I'm going to stop saying nice things about intelligent design. William Dembski defines intelligent design as having three parts. He says, intelligent design is a scientific research program that investigates the effects of intelligent causes, an intellectual movement that challenges Darwinism and its naturalistic legacy, and a way of understanding divine action. Well, frankly, two of these are religious statements, so I'm only going to talk about this one, because I'm a scientist and I don't have a dog in the fight of religion. So we're going to talk about his claim that intelligent design is a scientific research program that investigates the effects of intelligent causes. In his book, The Design Inference, he has what he calls the explanatory filter. I've broken it down to, I think, something that's a little bit more understandable than that. But basically, when you're trying to explain something, you look at it in terms of probabilities. Is it high probability? Well, then you just attribute it to law and regular processes. If it's intermediate probability, generally you could attribute that to chance. If it's a very low probability and it has a specification, which I'll talk about in a minute, then you can decide that that is design. So In Dembski's explanatory filter, let me just sort of walk you through that again, because I'm going to give you an example of it. Let's say you're trying to explain something. Let's say Dembski uses lotteries or other examples of, mostly his examples are human activities, because the point I'm going to make later on is this doesn't work very well in biology. But let's say you're trying to explain a lottery. There's what, maybe about 300 people in this audience? One of you, congratulations, one of you gets the surprise door prize for tonight. So we're going to take a look at this explanatory filter. So hang on for just a moment. Let's say you're trying to explain something. And the first thing that you would try to look at is this, can you explain it through natural cause? Well, a lottery is an example of a natural cause, so I sort of started off on the wrong foot here. So let's say if something you could explain through natural cause, the phases of the moon, okay? You look at the moon every month and you see that the moon goes through the same phases. It gets large, it gets small. Fine, you just attribute that to natural cause. You don't attribute it to design, no problem. But now let's go on to our lottery. And something that has intermediate probability, well, 300 people, that's kind of intermediate probability. You wouldn't imagine that there'd be design involved. Somebody's got to win it, so it wasn't you, but that's fine. But if it's a low probability, let's say that there were 5,000 people in this room, or 5 million people, well, that wouldn't work, would it? Let's say that there's 100,000 people listening to this on the radio, and one of you lucky people is going to win the prize. You might think, well, somebody's going to win it, so even a low probability event might just be an example of chance. But you'd want to know a few things. You'd want to know some specifications, so to speak. We'd want to know, who's drawing the winning ticket. Just so happens that among all you 100,000 people out here listening to this broadcast and here in this auditorium, Bruce Willis wins the $100 door prize. Congratulations, Bruce. Now, you are probably thinking, well, somebody had to win it. It wasn't me, but then I never win anything anyway. But you might not know that Bruce and I went to high school together, and I drew the ticket. So if you knew that kind of extra side information, you might suspect design, right? You might just suspect that there was something kind of fishy about this. So low probability events that have a specification, some kind of side information that helps you maybe make that inference that design was involved, that is the sort of thing that you attribute to design. Now, this may or may not work. Philosophers of science haven't been terribly impressed about it for predicting fraud or plagiarism or something like that. But it really doesn't work very well when you're talking about scientific issues. Let me give you an example of how this would have worked 300 years ago. Johannes Kepler was a pretty smart guy. But when he looked up at the moon, given his rather primitive telescopes, he saw something that looked not quite as good as this. This is a more recent photograph. He saw these circular items on the moon that had these little kind of dimples in the middle, and they were extremely regular. How is he going to explain these? Well, let's apply Dembski's explanatory filter. We're trying to explain these odd structures on the moon. High probability, certainly not. This occurs only on the moon, and so this is something that you would not attribute to natural law by any stretch of the imagination. Is it low probability? Is it unspecified? No, the specification is the circle. This is a very circular item. It's very, very regular. And so clearly this is something that you would attribute to design. And in fact, Johannes Kepler believed that the craters on the moon were produced by beings, by people who lived up on the moon and who dug them. Now, he didn't know why they dug them, but Kepler knew that people dig holes, and he knew that people are capable of digging perfectly circular structures like this, and Kepler didn't know anything about meteorites. Now, Kepler was not a foolish man, and we certainly don't laugh at him. He made wonderful discoveries. He was wrong in this instance, but if he had been using, in fact, I guess in a sense he was, using Dembski's design inference, he would be wrong, and he would be wrong for a very clear reason. He would be wrong because of that very first step, because he didn't realize that craters on the moon are natural objects. He didn't realize that there was information he did not yet understand about nature. He didn't realize that there were unknown natural causes that would cause you to branch at this very top level of understanding the design inference. And of course, a major criticism of the design inference is that it relies upon missing information. If we don't know an explanation for something, we are more likely to attribute it to design, whereas what Kepler should have said is, I don't know yet, because that's what modern evolutionary biologists do. When we see something like the bacteria flagellum that we do not yet have an evolutionary explanation for, we don't say, it is unexplainable, God did it. We make the inference of design, we say, I don't know yet, and we wait until we do. And that's the way science really does work, but that's not the way intelligent design science works. But notice what you have here in the general overall structure is that you basically have something very similar to the old two-model approach, where if you show that evolution can't explain something, then intelligent design does. It's very, very similar to the old explanation. And in general, intelligent design gives us insufficient choices. It says that chance cannot explain things like specified complexity or irreducible complexity. Natural selection can't explain these, so therefore intelligent design wins by default. But there are other mechanisms that might explain these phenomena we don't know yet. And furthermore, I think it's extremely important to recognize, as we have to do in science, that there may be unknown causes that we have not yet discovered. So it is certainly premature to say that intelligent design wins by default just because we don't yet have an evolutionary explanation for some phenomenon. And you know, something that's very interesting is I didn't talk about irreducible complexity, but it's a similar concept in terms of relying on what we don't know rather than what we do know. But if you've ever read any of the ID literature, they never talk about the irreducibly complex structures for which we do have a very good evolutionary explanation for, like, you know, the avian wrist, the mammalian middle ear. We got lots of stuff that's irreducibly complex, but they don't seem to point out those. I want to talk about another major problem with irreducible complexity. And this is, again, kind of a gestalt problem with irreducible complexity. The fact that they look at biological organisms as being equivalent to human artifacts, as equivalent to human manufactured things like watches. In this sense, they are extremely Palean in their orientation. And it sort of flows off of this example here. It's another reason why this kind of thinking really works very, very poorly when it comes to biology. Michael Behe is a prime example of this. In the Kitzmiller versus Dover trial, when he was on the stand, he argued that the complexity of biological structures is not just like machines, they simply are machines. The judge seemed to be having a little bit of trouble here with the computer here. I don't quite know why, but be patient here, folks. The lawyer asked, you indicated that he used the term machine. I believe Dr. Miller had testified that it's just a metaphor. Do you agree? Come on. No, I completely disagree. Biologists routinely talk about machines in the cell, and they use the term literally, not metaphorically. If you read the intelligent design literature, they talk a lot about Mount Rushmore, for example. Mount Rushmore, you all know the heads carved on the South Dakota mountain. And they point out that Mount Rushmore is complex. You see faces on a mountain, you know that there had to have been a designer because wind just does not form faces of presidents on the mountain. This cannot be the result of natural cause. So similarly, when you see structural complexity in nature, when you see something like the bacteria flagellum, you know there had to be a designer as well. Complexity then is the indicator of intelligent agency to the intelligent design proponents. We see complicated molecular motors like the bacteria flagellum. Come on, Guy, you can do it. Or the vertebrate eye, and we conclude from them that they're like Mount Rushmore. They are made by an intelligent agent. If it looks designed, it is designed, say the intelligent design proponents. And yet, when we see a paperclip, that's also designed, but it's not complex, is it? So what are we really talking about here? Is it just complexity, or is there something else that we need to consider when we're considering something like human agency and artifacts? They also talk a lot about SETI, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. In their discussions of SETI, they point out how the SETI investigators are looking for signs of intelligence. Well, actually they aren't. If you talk to the folks at SETI, they will tell you that they're not looking for complex signals. They're really, that was the movie Contact, you know, where they were looking for the prime number sequence. You all saw the movie, right? No, that's not what SETI is doing. That's what they did in a movie because it's much cuter than what they're actually doing in the actual research. What the SETI folks are looking for is not complexity, but artificiality. They're looking for a paperclip, not for Mount Rushmore. They're looking for narrowband signals that stand out among all the junk that's going on out there in space, all the background noise, because narrowband signals are not natural. Now, what do we mean when we say something is not natural? That's really the crux to understanding this. They also use the archaeology metaphor. They say if you see something like an arrowhead, you see a piece of rock that is chipped in a certain way, aha, archaeologists, say the intelligent design people, are looking for evidence of intelligence when they're going out looking for arrowheads or other remains of prehistoric people. Well, no, archaeologists are not looking for evidence of intelligence. They're looking for evidence of human artifacts. They're looking for things that are different from what you find naturally. They are looking for artificiality, just like the SETI investigators are looking for artificiality. It's not complexity that we're looking for. It's artificiality. Now, what do we mean by that? How do you know something is a human artifact? How do you know something is made by humans that it's not natural? Well, there's a number of criteria. If you saw a plastic arrowhead, you would know that that is made by, if you saw a plastic rock, like the kind you put keys in, you'd know that even though the shape of that is natural, that it was made by a human being. That would be a human artifact, not a natural thing. The material it's made out of is one of the things that tells you whether or not it's a natural or an artifactual thing, a human manufacture. You look at the shape or the form that it takes, like Mount Rushmore, certainly. But in particular, you know something is a human artifact if it's an assemblage. If you look at these parts of a carburetor, you know that when you put all of these parts together, you'll have a carburetor that works, unless I put it together, because I haven't a clue how this thing goes together. I don't even know. I found this on the internet. That's all I know about carburetors. One of the things about machines is that they are clearly human artifacts because they are, in the way the intelligent design people refer to it, a purposeful arrangement of parts, which abbreviated is PAP, but never mind. A purposeful arrangement of parts is a carburetor. You have all these parts that are separate, you put them together, and it works. It is a carburetor. That's exactly the same way they look at the bacteria flagellum. The bacteria flagellum, they say, is just like a carburetor. It's a bunch of independent parts which had to be put together all at one time in order to work. Well, living things aren't like artifacts in that sense. They are not purposeful arrangement of parts. They are not necessarily. Those cells diversify into tissues, and tissues diversify into organs, and eventually you get a full organism. In other words, living things grow and develop and evolve. They are not purposeful arrangement of parts. The whole notion of comparing living things to carburetors or purposeful arrangement of parts is just simply the wrong analogy, and I'm really having trouble getting this slide to change now. Please do change. I don't know why. We may be looking at soybeans the whole rest of the night. And another thing that's very different about living things versus machines is that there's no right construction for a soybean plant. There is a right construction for a carburetor. If you leave one of these parts out, or you leave a couple of these parts out, or you put them together wrong, your car's not going to run. But there's a lot of ways for soybean plant to work. There's a lot of ways for a plant to work. There's a lot of ways for example, animals on land to get around. Okay, boys and girls, how many legs does an insect have? Yay, hurrah. There's biology teachers all over the place. How many legs does a spider have? Yes, very good. How many legs does a millipede have? Got you there, didn't I? A whole bunch, right? And antelope have 4 legs. Now, obviously, you can locomote on land with 4 legs, 2 legs, 6 legs, 8 legs, a whole bunch of legs. There's no one way for an animal to be able to get around on land. There's a lot of different ways to get around on land. There's no purposeful arrangement of parts that is the best way to make an organ, even a mammal, even just taking within mammals, a mammal be able to locomote on land. The idea that living things are a purposeful arrangement of parts just is completely confused. Another point, with artifacts like those from archaeology or Mount Rushmore, we know that these things are made from humans because we've had experience with human artifacts. We've seen carvings, we've seen arrowheads made, we've seen people painting on walls and cave paintings and so forth. I keep trying to get this. All these human artifacts, we've got some experience with them. We know humans made them, we know they made them for a purpose, we know the kinds of implements that were used to make them, we know a lot about them. When it comes to something like a bacteria flagellum, we have no idea what the purpose of a creator of a bacteria flagellum would be. We have no idea who the agent was, the intelligent designer. We don't know the purpose the agent made the bacteria flagellum for. We don't know what techniques he used. I don't know what techniques this computer uses. We don't know what materials the intelligent agent used. We've got no reason to have any kind of idea as to why the agent made the bacteria flagellum this way rather than some other way. It's unknowns all the way down. This is hardly a solid scientific argument. And I would say worse than that is that there's no way that we can test any hypothesis about the omnipotent agent. No question about the designer because I'm really having trouble getting this to work here. Please work. Otherwise, we really are in trouble here for the rest of the talk. Anybody listening to this on the radio is wondering, why is she whimpering so much? Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're just going to have to. I have always said that PowerPoint should not be your master. Yes, I understand. The slides are an illustration. You're here to hear me, and that's what I'm going to do. However, the pictures are going to be real short from now on. As I mentioned before, if you're going to try to test a scientific explanation, here comes the magic man here. Sure, give it a try. If you're going to test a scientific explanation, I have to stand close to the gadget there, so why don't you just move? If you're going to test a scientific explanation, you have to hold constant certain variables. How do you test any sort of hypothesis about the intelligent designer? The intelligent designer can do anything he wants, or she wants, or they want, or it wants. It is completely outside of science. That doesn't mean there's no designer. That doesn't mean God did not design. That just means that it's outside of science. But the intelligent design proponents claim that theirs is a scientific position. But when you really carefully examine it, their scientific position devolves very quickly to, we can't explain it by science, therefore intelligent design wins. There is no positive argument for intelligent design. There's nothing about who is the agent, what did the agent do, when did the agent do it. Those are my little notes here. Come on. Close enough. Where does this take us in terms of public school education? I'm not sure where we are right now, but let's just go on. Intelligent design proponents have for a number of years presented the idea that it was a good idea to teach intelligent design and that it was legal to do so, and they exhorted teachers to teach intelligent design. In about 2002, they changed their mind. This monograph from De Wolfmeyer and DeForest was published in, I think, 1999. I'm sorry, 2000 in the Utah Law Review, and basically makes the argument that, yes, we should be teaching intelligent design in public school biology class. In about 2002, they shifted gears and decided, well, no, we don't want teachers to teach intelligent design. They made this argument during the struggle over the Ohio science education standards. They said, instead of teaching intelligent design, you should balance evolution with teaching the evidence against evolution. Do a critical analysis of evolution. Now, this is basically what we're facing now. This was even before the Kitzmiller versus Dover trial. After Kitzmiller versus Dover, it's even less likely that intelligent design will be promoted at the high school level because it was so thoroughly defeated in the courts. But it'll still crop up for a few years, we know that. But I think the next line of attack is going to be arguing for teaching evolution and the evidence against evolution. And there's a number of different euphemisms for this. Teach the evidence for and evidence against evolution. You might hear teach both strengths and weaknesses of evolution. Teach evolution as theory, not fact. Teach the full range of views about origins, and from the Discovery Institute, teach the controversy. By the way, when the Discovery Institute says teach the controversy, what they mean is pretend to students that scientists are arguing over whether evolution took place. But it's a great phrase, you know. Who wouldn't want to teach the controversy? Well, don't we want students to know everything there is? It's a dodge. Whenever you hear any of these euphemisms, think, aha, this is creationism. This is just the new form of creationism. And again, it is the two-model approach. Evidence against evolution is evidence for intelligent design. Now, what we've seen over the past few years is creation science morphing into intelligent design, morphing into a critical thinking kind of approach, where they will argue that we should give the students all the evidence. And there's two branches that this takes. One, teach evidence against evolution, in other words, teach the controversy. And the second one is that teachers are exhorted to teach evolution and all the scientific theories. Now, the person looking rather quizzical next to you is the high school biology teacher or the scientist from the university are saying, what other scientific theories? Because if you're talking about scientific explanations of diversity and origins, you're talking common ancestry. That's it. That is the only scientific explanation. So if you ask a proponent of this, well, what do you mean by all the theories? Somehow we come right back to intelligent design. We've seen this kind of morphing in a number of circumstances, in a number of science standards arguments over the last few years, as well as a number of local communities where intelligent design supporters morphed into, creation science supporters morphed into intelligent design supporters, and then finally made the full evolutionary sequence to supporters of evidence against evolution. And the Discovery Institute, in fact, is circulating a model policy which reads, teachers in their discretion may encourage students to consider both the scientific strengths and weaknesses of evolutionary theory in order to better understand the assigned curriculum. I love this. This policy does not call for the study of creationism, nor does it call for the study of intelligent design theory, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. You don't have to teach it. Now, this is very clever from a legal standpoint. The policy in Dover was a statute. I mean, this was a regulation the school board passed, thou shalt teach intelligent design. You can make a facial challenge to that. You can challenge that policy on its face. To challenge this policy, because it doesn't say you have to teach intelligent design, it just says you don't have to teach it. What that means is you have to find a teacher who's actually teaching it. This is what they call an as-applied challenge. This is very clever of them to do this. This is an encouragement for teachers to teach intelligent design, but making it much, much more difficult for anybody who wants to challenge this. Because A, you've got to find a student and a parent, a student in that class who has standing to sue, and it's just enormously more difficult to do an as-applied challenge than it is to do a facial challenge. So this is really smart. These guys aren't dumb. They're doing fine. It does not call for the study of intelligent design, but it doesn't ban it either, now does it? Okay, notice the clever wording. And this wording showed up in Grantsburg, Wisconsin a couple of years ago, where the policy read, students shall be able to explain the scientific strengths and weaknesses of evolutionary theory. This policy does not call for the teaching of creationism or intelligent design. So I think this is what we have to look forward to. evidence against evolution policies to balance out the teaching of evolution. The Discovery Institute published a book, Traipsing into Evolution, which criticized the Kitzmiller versus Dover decision, in which they wrote, in fact, administrative guidelines, legislative enactments are needed to provide clearer protection for the rights of students and teachers to critically analyze Darwin's theory in the classroom. By the way, what's this Darwin's theory stuff, you know? If you ever get into the intelligent design literature, it's actually almost comical, the way they keep harping about Darwinism. Darwinism, Darwinism, Darwinism. And Darwinists do this, and Darwinism is that. And you know, I keep trying to encourage my friends over in geology to please start referring to themselves as Lyellists. and if you physicists would be so kind as to please start referring to yourself as Kelvinists, this would help. I mean, shouldn't we all refer to ourselves by our 19th century forebears? I mean, it's only fair. I mean, why should we be, you know, stuck calling ourselves Darwinists? This is a rhetorical ploy. This is a very clever rhetorical ploy, because Darwinism is an ism. It's an ideology. And by calling evolutionary biology Darwinism, it leaves the impression in the listener's mind that this is an ideology. This is just another religion. You don't want your students taught an ideology. Those Darwinists are teaching Darwinism. And a Darwinist is a practitioner of the ideology of Darwinism in a way that a botanist is not a practitioner of botanism, right? So, you know, the Darwinist stuff is just a rhetorical ploy. And if anybody, if you get into discussion with an ID supporter, say, what do you mean by Darwinism? They generally don't know. It either means what Darwin was talking about in the 1900s, which is far removed from what we talk about these days, or it means, maybe it means the synthetic theory of evolution, but we're sort of beyond that too. We're actually in post-synthetic theory, post-molecular evolution, evolutionary biology today. Generally, Darwinism, in the hands of ID folks, refers to an atheistic ideology. That's what they want people to hear when they hear Darwinism. We've had a surprising amount of legislation in 2006. You can find out more about this on our website. Most of this is not passed. The Oklahoma bill passed. Most of the rest of them died in committee. We're still keeping an eye on a couple of these states, but we don't know for sure what's going to happen. Not all of these are ID bills. Most of these actually are evidence against evolution bills. They're bills that would somehow inhibit the teaching of evolution. Where do you go for more information? I wouldn't be a good ex-college professor if I didn't tell you, would I? Robert Pennock's book, Tower of Babel, is an excellent analysis of the philosophy of science and a lot of the science of intelligent design. The companion book, Intelligent Design, Creationism and Its Critics, by the same author, or editor. Creationism's Trojan Horse by Forrest and Gross is an excellent analysis of the wedge strategy. This is not so much science as it is the political and sociological, as it were, the motivations of the intelligent design, what they call the cultural renewal aspect of intelligent design. Why Intelligent Design Fails by Matt Young and Tanner Edis. A little bit harder reading, a little bit more technical. The science faculty would probably enjoy it very much. My book, Evolution versus Creationism, is certainly readable by anybody. It's called Evolution versus Creationism, An Introduction, and that's what it is. And two very good websites, talkorigins.org discusses both intelligent design and creation science. pandasthumb.org is a blog where you'll get a lot of science as well and a lot of polemics. These guys have a lot of fun with intelligent design. Other place where you can go is, of course, ncseweb.org, our website. Our website looks like this. If you go to the newsroom, you can get real depressed. You can sort by year and pull up all the things that happened in, say, 2003, or down there you see state of interest. You can pull up Washington and see what's been going on in your state. And also, if you go to the resources button up there, you can go to Creationism and Intelligent Design and see a number of other resources that would help you understand this most vexing controversy of ours. Again, ncseweb.org. We recently moved our office. And my colleagues at NCSE are Eric Mickle, Wesley Ellsbury, Susan Spath, Nick Motzke, and Glenn Branch, definitely not least, but last, Glenn Branch, my deputy director. And these are the people who really make NCSE the wonderful organization that it is. Not only is it a very pleasant place to work for me personally, but we get a whole lot done, and it's because of these folks. And I'm the one who kind of they let me out to talk like this, but they're the ones who really get the credit for. Probably a lot of you have talked to some of these people on the telephone or through email, and sometimes people like to know what these folks look like. So I thank my staff, and I very much thank you for inviting me to be your speaker for this very interesting sounding series of lectures coming up. Thank you. Okay with me.
So Dr. Scott will be glad to answer some questions. We have 2 microphones conveniently placed on either side at the front of the aisle. If any of you would like to ask questions of Dr. Scott, please come up and help us out.
I'm just curious as to what the evidence against evolution they seem to propose.
Well, it's pretty much just recycled stuff from creation science, like gaps in the fossil record, the inability of random variation and natural selection to produce complicated things like body plans and flagellas. They claim that there's this huge gulf between the microevolutionary forces, selection, mutation, migration, and drift, that they can't do anything but just swap the genes around within a kind, although they don't say kind, but that's really what they're talking about. They'll also fuss about Haeckel's embryos and say, look, this 19th century embryologist faked some of his drawings, which he actually didn't do, but never mind. That's the claim. And therefore, evolution didn't happen, although that seems to be kind of a reach, because actually developmental biology is one of the strongest and most exciting areas of evolutionary biology research these days. And believe me, the discoveries that scientists are making today do not depend on what Haeckel made in the 1900s, in the 19th century.
Could I just suggest that one of the arguments you made was unnecessarily weak, and that was the one about William Dembski and specified complexity. You said we may find an explanation for it. My reading of Dembski is that when he talks about specified complexity, he simply means adaptive information in the genome, that is, genes doing things that are highly adapted. And there is an explanation for that natural selection. He then has some specific arguments, one of them a supposed law of conservation of information, the other this no free lunch theorem. Both of those are fallacious, leaving you, he thinks he has an argument that says natural selection could not put this ordinary adaptive information into the genome. It can, and his arguments against are wrong. So I think in saying we may find an explanation for it someday, you're accepting the image he wants to project, which is that this is some mysterious special message that we're finding in the genome, rather than simply the ordinary adaptations of molecules like, say, hemoglobin.
Indeed, and thank you for that clarification. I didn't mean to imply that the claims of either Behe or Dembski have been unanswered, that we are just sort of throwing up our hands. What I was trying to present in that is sort of just a general way of thinking about these problems. But thank you for helping to clarify that, because I don't want to leave people with the misconception that these, and that is actually very important. I think I would like to underscore that. The intelligent design proponents often say, well, the scientific community is closed-minded. They're not letting us make our arguments. They refuse to listen to us. The fingers are stuck in the ears. The dogmatic Darwinists are not letting us have our day in the sun. Well, that's not true, because there's only 2 ideas. There's irreducible complexity and Dembski stuff. And we looked at all of them. And we looked at them 10 years ago. We presented the arguments as to, the scientific community presented the arguments as to why irreducible complexity doesn't work, why Dembski's arguments don't work, why you can explain these kinds of phenomena through natural selection or other natural causes. And now the normal way that scientific theories are built is that they respond. They are supposed to come back and say, okay, here, I fixed the theory, here's the new, here's the new version, and then we look at it again. They've never come back with a new version. They just keep repeating the same old, same old. And until they start acting like scientists, I don't see there's any reason for us to treat them like it.
I have this question. I'm a mathematician, so now I've heard recently that they're using mathematics as a form of intelligent design.
That what is a form?
Mathematics is used as a form of to explain intelligent design.
It's used as part of Dembski's argument, probability
as a form
theory.
of intelligent design, yeah, mathematics. Now, most engineers I've met, not all, most feel that mathematics is an artifact, something that's artificial, created for them to get patents, and so on. Now, great mathematicians, on the other hand, believe it's a natural part of the universe. You know, they're Platonic. That's the Platonic ideal that mathematics is part of nature itself, you know, an intrinsic part of it. Now, and then now recently, this about a month ago, a mathematician got the Templeton Award in Religion and Science. It's a $1.4 million award. So there's this thing building up, using mathematics as a way to explain intelligent design.
Interesting observation. Thank you for that. Yes.
So we had a speaker on campus recently. You were kind of talking about possible next directions for creation to resurface. We had a speaker on campus recently who has written publicly in the past that the Supreme Court has done a grave injustice to Christian parents in this country by a overly strict interpretation of the Anti-Establishment Clause of the First Amendment. I've heard an argument rather like this from a number of people. This is a democratic nation. Who are you to stand up here against democratic principles and tell us what we can decide we can teach our children in our communities? You see this as a likely next direction, and if so, what do we do about it?
Oh, yeah. I think that church-state separation is under very strong attack in this country currently. It doesn't have to stay that way, but that's the way it is now. And I think that that is something that Christians should worry about. Who's going to determine whose prayer is taught in the public schools? You know, I think it was in Mississippi, my brain is going, I guess I'm getting old. There was a very famous case in Mississippi a few years ago where, having to do with prayer in school, other sort of religious activities, I think it was a graduation prayer. And it was brought by a Methodist who didn't like the fact that it was a Baptist prayer. Okay? Now, we sort of tend to forget that separation of church and state protects the church. And we also tend to forget that just because Christians are the most numerous of Americans, that is not the only religious view presented or found among Americans. Americans are a highly religiously pluralistic society. Some parts of the country are more homogeneous than others, but certainly the nation as a whole is very heterogeneous. And Christianity is very heterogeneous. I think something like close to 80% of Americans say that they're Christians, and that 80% hides a tremendous amount of variation. So, yeah, I think these all sort of go hand in glove. But the idea that Christian religion is necessarily under attack because evolution is being taught in the schools simply misses the point. It is true that some Christian views, some Abrahamic views, some Muslim views, as well as Jewish views, are incompatible with common ancestry. That is true. That doesn't mean that all Christian views are, and in fact the courts have held very clearly, but maybe this is your point, that it is not the job of the school district to tailor the curriculum to suit the religious sensibilities of people in the community. That has already been decided by the courts. You know, it'll be very interesting to see where the Supreme Court goes in the next few years. But it's actually much scarier on the district court level, my friends.
I just have a possible contribution to your thumper philosophy, actually. One of the issues it seems that we could take seriously here is that this is a call to teach science better.
Amen.
And the issue is teaching science not as a collection of facts, but as a process for building good models about the natural world. What I'd see playing into this is there's claims about, there's misunderstandings perpetuated both by scientists and non-scientists that science is sort of a march towards absolute or sober truth. And this, I think, is often in the ID proponent literature something that's claimed when you talk about Darwinism, and Darwinists, what Darwinists want a chokehold on absolute truth. So one question is, do you have any ideas about how to better do this?
Yeah, actually, I think that, in fact, tomorrow I'll be talking to the biology teachers on how to teach evolution better, and the first few how to teach evolution betters have to do with nature science, and one of the things that I want to talk about is to encourage teachers to have a healthy balance between the reliability of science and the open-endedness of science. And because I think we do a real disservice to students if we just sort of say, everything in my class is changing this. Nonsense. Everything in your class is not changing every year. You are lying to your students if you're telling them that. That's a lot of nonsense. The sciatic notch in females is still larger than that in males every single year. It's not, there's lots of things that we teach that remain absolutely the same. I use an example that I stole from Jim Trefil, the physicist, from an ancient article of his, where he talked about science as being composed of 3 concentric circles. Now, the central circle, the middle circle here, are the core ideas of science. Now, these are the ideas that are really well established, and we sort of aren't really testing them anymore. We find that they work, they generate lots of hypotheses, they're just really sound. The frontier, the next circle around the core, is where all the real scientific research is going on. That's what the people at this university are doing. They're on the frontiers of science. They're testing ideas generated by the core ideas. Some of those ideas will go into the core, others won't. Most of them won't. Most ideas don't work out. That's the nature of things. You get used to that. The frontier ideas, though, are where the real sifting and winnowing takes place. Then the third concentric circle is the fringe. And these are ideas that generally nobody in science is really spending any time on. Sometimes fringe ideas do come into the frontier. In fact, the classic example of that is continental drift. Continental drift started out as a fringe idea. It became a frontier idea. It eventually now is a core idea of geology, plate tectonics. Evolution is a core idea of science. Heliocentrism. I keep getting those mixed up. Heliocentrism is here to stay. Which doesn't mean that the details of core ideas can't still be tinkered with. We still have more to learn about gravitation, and that certainly is a core idea of science. So the frontier ideas of science are where we're really expanding our knowledge. There's a lot of give and take, a lot of stuff that we're going to throw out, a lot of stuff we might be keeping, but the core ideas of science are still solid. And if we can help students understand that science is reliable, it's a process that results in really reliable information that's been very useful as well. But we still are willing to change our minds. We're even willing to change our minds about heliocentrism, but it's probably here to stay.
Thank you for a very interesting presentation. I actually come from a common ancestor, I should put it that way, that was fired from teaching evolution in the public schools in Wisconsin in 1990. And I was not exposed to evolution in the high schools. I had it at home, origin of species and things like that. And I'm actually curious, after 30-some years teaching at university, I encounter very few students who say they were taught evolution, let alone
that they were
creation,
or were
in
not.
the public school. So I had sort of 2 questions, and it comes really from ignorance. I was curious how many people here, if any, are high school biology teachers, and if in fact they are teaching evolution in the public schools, because I'm sort of astonished at the few students who actually are taught.
Okay, how many of you are high school biology teachers? Raise your hands. Yay! And keep your hand up if you teach evolution. Yeah. It's the ones who aren't here that we're worried about. One reason why we're having this big kerfluffle about evolution and intelligent design and creationism and all this stuff, frankly, is because evolution is in the curriculum, and it is in the textbook, and it is in the science standards, and it's in the national science education standards, it's in all the state science education standards, so it is being taught. Whenever evolution is taught, that's when anti-evolutionism really gears up. So it's really been the standards movement, and ironically enough, the thing that was really kick-started the current burst of anti-evolutionism of the last 3 or 4 years is the No Child Left Untested, the 2001 Federal Education Act, NCLB, which calls for testing of students in science by 2007. So if you haven't been testing in science by now, by 2007, you have to, or you start losing federal aid. Which means that there's an awful lot of tests being written right now that will start being administered in the next few years, and if it's on the test, it's going to be taught. That's just the way it works. I'm sorry to say, the tests are going to drive the curriculum. If it's on the test, it's going to be taught. How are they going to make up the test? They're going to look at the standards. So anytime a state's science education standards come up for review, the creationists are going to attack it like they did in Texas, like they did in Kansas, like they did in, where are we now, in Ohio, in New Mexico. I can tick off, in Minnesota, I can tick off any state standard that's come up in the last 5 years has been attacked to try to get evolution out, or to get evidence against evolution in, or get intelligent design in. This is why we're having all these troubles.
People have been patiently waiting for questions. I think we're going to have to cut it off after these two, so go ahead.
Okay. So in the mid-90s, you wrote a piece about the folly of debating people like Dwayne Gish.
Yep.
And I think that some of the people here have some more recent experience about what can go wrong, because the promoters of intelligent design are rhetorically very, very good at debating. But in light of the fact that some huge percentage of the American population professes not to believe in evolution,
I don't believe in
still say
evolution.
that's a good idea? Your original, how do you feel about that?
Wait. You don't believe in evolution, do you? How many of you believe in evolution? Come on. Wrong answer. Okay. If I said, how many of you believe in cell membrane permeability, you'd laugh, because cell membrane permeability is not a belief, and neither is evolution. Okay. Train yourself not to use the B word with the E word. Okay. We don't want to miseducate people. Now, the point is debating. It is absolutely essential for the science community, the educator community, any educated person to meet the claims of the creationists. It is absolutely important that we have a citizenry that understands why this is bad science, why it's bad philosophy of science, why it should not be told. That said, a formal debate is not the place to make that argument. That is my point about don't debate. I never said don't answer the creationists. It's extremely important to answer the creationists, but answer them in a forum where the public is not confused about the nature of science. And debates do that. Debate is a sport, okay? Debate is a sport. It has winners and losers. I don't think any scientist in this room has ever gone to a scientific conference where scientist A was on this side of the stage, scientist B was on that side of the stage, and at the end they said, well, we vote for scientist A. That's not how we do it. It's a whole lot messier than that. You have to argue with your colleagues, you have to present papers at meetings, you have to build your theory, you have to try to get papers written, you have to try to get them accepted, you have to take feedback. It's this sort of lurching forward and lurching to the side and falling back and then lurching forward again. It's not decided on a stage by two individuals. So the whole structure of a debate, even visually, representationally, is just wrong to communicate to the public as to what science is all about. Furthermore, you visually also miseducate the public, because you've got a person on the evolution side and a person on the intelligent design side. Now, what's wrong with that? How many people are really over there on the evolution side? Okay? But to a person who's just trying to learn about this, it looks like Tweedledum and Tweedledee. Gee, I didn't know evolution was in so much trouble. A classical debate is the wrong way to do it. Now, what you can do is you can have your own show. have talks like this. I hope, a lot of people learned about some ideas about intelligent design, got more information as to where to go to learn more about it, and I would encourage you to learn more about it and learn about the criticisms of it, and help your friends and neighbors and colleagues understand what these are. But not debates. I haven't changed my mind any. I haven't seen anything to make me change my mind.
During your speech, I heard that the examples that you
You have to hunch. If you stand down, it'll be easier, I think. There you go.
During your speech, I noticed that you mentioned that where the flashpoint was for these debates over teaching intelligent design were happening in schools at the K through 12 level, but this was in a formal setting, like I said, school. Where do museums fit in, if at all? Many institutions, such as the Burke, are very dedicated to teaching evolution. Have we been spared this because we are largely a lot of the education that goes on in a museum is informal, or are we next on a list, or are there examples?
That is a marvelous question. Thank you for bringing it up. The informal science education network, which would include zoos, museums, aquaria, a variety of places, science centers and so forth, have also been wrestling with this issue. I spoke at Aztec last year, and there was a lot of interest in my comments. Problems vary hugely. Also, national park interpreters have problems with evolution. The folks at Grand Canyon are always getting challenged about it's not really a million years old, is it? Museums have a much more difficult situation actually than teachers do, in my opinion. Teachers have a curriculum to stand behind. You know, the teacher can say, I'm sorry, Mrs. Brown, I've got to teach evolution because here it is in the state standards, right? A museum has a paying customer base that they have to continue to attract. And you also have your standards that you have to maintain. You have the institutional integrity that is important that you've got to keep in mind. Museums wrestle with this a lot, and museums do get hammered about evolution. I know museums that will do displays of everything up to human evolution and then just don't quite get around to human evolution, because that's the really touchy one. But my experience with museums has been that they've just kind of swallowed hard and pressed on. But sometimes their boards of directors cause problems. And so, museum, it's tough. It's tough. I've been interested in getting more involved in doing helping to prepare materials for museum interpreters and docents. And I've been working with Warren Allman up at the Paleontological Research Institute, PRI, up in Cornell. Really, really bright guy and fun to work with and great ideas. So hopefully we'll get funded and we'll come up with some materials that could be distributed to museums that are struggling with, what do you do with visitors who come in and have questions, not necessarily aggressive questioning. Aggressive questioners you can deal with. It's the people who are really sincere and, really struggling with this that you want to help. What's the best way to help them? And that would be our goal. Well, thank you so much. You've been enormously patient as well.
You're watching TVW.